Thank you, sir, for your generous introduction and warm welcome. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone here. We express our gratitude to the Archaeological Department of the Cambridge University for giving us this opportunity to present our ideas in this prestigious conference. As second-year undergraduate history honors students, we find this as a great opportunity to learn from experienced research scholars, such as everyone here. We regret to inform that we cannot join you all, but this is our first experience in academic conference, and we are looking forward to learning and receiving your suggestions and reviews to further develop this paper. So the name of our paper is from Somanatha to Babri, Impact of Indian Religiosity on Indian Heritage. I shall be discussing what we'll be doing. Okay, we're going to discuss the historiographical debate of the influence of colonial history writing on contemporary narrative of nation building through the case study of Ayodhya, highlight the role of archaeology in shaping public opinion, and question the narrative of objectivity in archaeology. Discuss the role of colonial historiography that changed the nature of communalism in the Indian landscape, bring forth the contending narratives of secular and communal historiography to understand the course of history writing in the post-colonial empire. And we'll also look into the emerging historiographical schools and problematizing the colonial nationalist historiography. On the day of the hearing of the petition for the access of Hindus into the Babri Masjid in Faizabad District Court judgment, writes Judge K.M. Pandey in his autobiography. He saw a monkey perched on the boundary wall holding a flag post. People were offering food to it, but it did not accept. Judge Pandey felt it was unusual for the monkey to refuse to eat. He then went into his chambers and ruled, Muslims are not going to be affected by any stretch of imagination if the locks of the gates were opened. If the Hindu devotees were given access, then heavens would not fall, except they did. There was nationwide rioting. This anecdote forms the crux of our argument that we shall be presenting. To understand the context, we shall go back to 1857, when the chief priest of a nearby temple took over a part of the Babri Masjid's courtyard, claiming it to be a Ram Chabutra, which is supposedly the birthplace of Lord Ram. The British government built a wall in 1859, separating the worship for the Hindus and Muslims. In 1885, Raghubar Das filed an unsuccessful suit to gain legal title to the land and the permission to construct a temple on the Chabutra. However, there was no claim that any temple had stood where the mosque did. In 1949, after a 9-day continuous reading of the Ramayana, the idols of Ram and Sita were secretly placed in the mosque, and as the crowds gathered, the police locked the premises.
The process of nation building is a prolonged project, and no individual or group can claim the sole right to envision the picture of a nation. National consciousness is produced through the collective memories of historical experiences, shared trauma, culture, and tradition, making the politics of memory central to the creation of national consciousness. Specifically, the politics of nation building is not separate from the production of public memory. The two major narratives of communal and universities-based secular histories are in a constant struggle to become the dominant narrative. In the 1990s, after the demolition of the masjid by the Hindu religious activists, historical thinking has become an integral part of political discourse. The attempt to recover the ideal Hindu lost motherland and its glory had its political manifestation in this dispute, and the appropriation of space with the help of archaeology as a discipline to legitimize the dominant political religion claims.
After B.B. Law's resignation from the post of Director General of the ASI, the Archaeological Survey of India, he received a national project named the Archaeology of Ramayana Sites. In October 1919, Lal published an article in Manthan, an RSS magazine, and showed the images of several brick bat heaps. The excavation photos of Ayodhya, which he claimed were the pillar bases of the temple destroyed by Babur. Thus, these pillars were crucial for the authentication of the existence of the temple under the masjid. Verma and Menon, the witnesses of the archaeological excavation in 2003, comment. It is therefore surprising that this information was not published in an archaeological journal, but in a magazine affiliated to a political organization. For Lal, to ascertain whether any temple lay beneath the Babri Masjid was to dig under the mosque. Menon and Verma add on, the implications and the consequences of a former Director General of the ASI calling for such excavations cannot be ignored. The archaeological evidences can be roughly divided into two, the surface architectural fragments and the pillar bases. In the Ayodhya surface excavation, we have 12 pieces of stone slabs that were excavated. I'll be mentioning the designs of a few. There was one with the Srivatsa design, which is a symbol of an endless knot, which is associated with Jainism. A slab with a lotus design could be a Buddhist or Jain representation, and a slab with Lorentz design, which could have belonged to the Babri Masjid itself, and a sculpture showing the waist of two human figurines. As mentioned earlier, B.B. Lal places the crux of the validity of the existence of a temple to the pillar bases. The pillar bases are supposed to be the foundations on which the stone pillars stood. It was considered that the black stone pillars that were in the masjid were the original pillars of the temple, which according to Lal and ASI were under the mosque. If that was the case, then these pillars should have fitted into the only bases that were recovered intact in the excavation. However, these pillars have dimensions that do not fit the pillar bases recovered in the north. In addition to that, even before these pillar bases had actually been carved out, the ASI had already declared the existence of one in their progress report. This clearly reveals the preconceived notions with which the ASI is carrying out these excavations. When Varna, Menon, and other witnesses complained that the ASI was working with preconceived notion, the arguments were used against them, accusing them on the grounds to criticize the ASI. The report by Verma and Menon mentions the creation of pillar bases in namely G2 and F6 was accepted in the judgment not to have conformity to any temple in North India.
By now, we have come to understand that archaeology is a tool to understand historical processes, but it cannot exist beyond subjectivity of interpretation, as archaeological evidences do not speak for themselves. Therefore, archaeology should be viewed as a supporting methodology to comprehend material culture and must not be applied to make truth claims. Coming back to the small anecdote, it is important to locate the context within which the irony of the event is situated. The monkey symbolizing Hanuman, the closest ally of Ram in the Ramayana epic, reflects the religious bias of the judge who succumbed to his beliefs and seems to have lost the eye of objectivity. It can as well be argued that Judge Pandey's decision at the court was largely prompted by divinity rather than rationality. The results were preposterous as nationwide riots broke out, claiming lives of hundreds, making us question the notion of objectivity. By the later stage of the dispute, the case was reduced to whether there was a temple under the mosque or not. The legal battle was fought over the right of the land. Very little emphasis was given to the destruction of the mosque and the trauma that was associated with it. The understanding of the heritage and the violation of constitutional providence of protection of monuments was dispensed with. This brings us to yet another important question of how socio-political narrative has the power to determine what is heritage and what is not. The cases of desecration of Somnath and Babri stand alike, nonetheless are far apart from each other in the way that the nationalist narrative treated them. The issue of Babri was reduced to an answer of yes or no, while Somnath became central to the restoration of national pride. There was no emphasis on the intangible heritage associated with the mosque.
Much of the political discourse is centered around the politicization of religion in India, marked by the Hindu-Muslim mill. It has become commonsensical knowledge to trace this antagonism to the colonial narratives of Islamic invasions from the 10th century onwards, and further to the partition of 1947, where the Islamic State of Pakistan was carved out of the heartlands of India. But today, we wish to draw your attention on the role of colonial historiography that changed the nature of communalism in the Indian landscape. The mid-20th century study of Indian history, especially medieval, was dominated by colonial perspective. James Mill periodized Indian history into ancient, medieval, and modern, with association of Hindus, Muslims, and British respectively. The colonial historians, who were majorly retired bureaucrats, such as Eliot and Dawson, translated only abstract sources from the medieval period, describing the period as tyranny filled with murder and marauders. Along the same lines, the narrative of a Hindu trauma by the invasion of Mahmud and his destruction of Somanatha temple was a colonial fabrication, which was taken up by the nationalist historiography, keen to undertake a cultural cleansing and rid India free of alien influences. In fact, the notion that early Indians had a communal consciousness of Hindu and Muslim stands debated. Communal historians view the Hindu and Muslim communities as concrete and monolithic. Secular historians, on the other hand, view them with diluted boundaries. Hindu right represents the Muslim rulers as intolerant, oppressive, violent, exploitative, and extractive. The secular narratives would view the same community as open-minded and tolerant to the other community. There is always this degree of representation and perspective to it.
The political boundaries of contemporary India have come to determine what falls within the Indian civilization and what lies external to it. However, such biases are not without paradoxes, where the cultures born out of the synthesis of the deemed invaders form the part of Indian cultural history, but the people associated with it are rejected as foreigners. The purpose of this paper is to highlight the lack of acknowledgement of heritage as it stands. What colonial historiography did to India was plant the seed of undoing and redoing history. It is imperative to recognize that Indian history is a culmination of a plethora of processes that were in work simultaneously. Romila Thapar criticized the ideological anxiety to prove the historicity of Indian texts, which leads to uncritical reading of the epic poetries based on Indian oral traditions. The personification of Ram Lalla as a claimant to the mosque land is reflective of the Indian tendency to historicize epic heroes. Through this paper, we wish to encourage critical reading of literature and to perceive them as a part of our heritage. The fabric of Indian history has been formed through the interweaving of many cultures, and attempts to pull out certain threads from the narrative would leave it undone. There should be a greater emphasis on understanding heritage, both tangible and intangible, as to acknowledge all forms of heritage as a part of Indian historical landscape and to reject colonial nationalist school of communal history.
Thank you, and we are done with the presentation.